Okay, good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure today to introduce Professor Andrew Hugill. Andrew is the Deputy Director at the Digital Culture Institute within the University of Leicester, and he'll be talking to us tonight regarding neural controllers in music making, the Digital Syzygies project. Andrew, over to you. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Pete, and hello everybody. Good evening. Welcome. Greetings from a rather cold and wet Market Harborough. So I'm going to share my screen. Get some slides going. Is that okay for everybody? Can everybody see that clearly?
We can, yes, thank you.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you. Thanks, David. I'm going to talk to you about this project that I recently completed. That's part of a much larger project funded by the European Research Council, and this is looking at using neural controllers or electroencephalogram AI for music making. So I thought I'd just start with, if I can get my slides to cooperate. I thought I'd just start with a little demonstration. So this lasts about 2 minutes. It's an audio piece. You're going to hear some sounds. There's some whooshing sounds, some bird-like sounds. The dynamic levels are not too loud, but there's a kind of quiet bit in the middle, and it varies like that. But there's nothing too sort of violent or shocking in the sounds. I'll explain why I'm warning people later. Here we go. Okay, so just to explain what's going on here, you'll see that I'm wearing a headset. This is actually got 6 sensors that are attached, 2 at the front that you can clearly see. There are 2 at the side, 1 on the top, 1 at the back. And those are reading the brain activity that is going on, and they're interpreting that in the form of 6 performance metrics, which you can see on the left of the screen where it says emotive BCI, and the 2-letter, you can see my mouse here, but these are the abbreviations of engagement, excitement, focus, interest, relaxation, and stress. And you can see that this is expressed as a scrolling graph that actually updates every 10 seconds. And the sounds you're hearing are sounds that have been pre-processed using this system to evoke a particular response from my brain. So where a sound causes me to engage, for example, there'll be a spike in the engagement line, and then the sound gets put into a library of engaging sounds according to my brain activity, and so on for the other 6 performance metrics. And then during the live performance that you just saw, my brain then responds to the sounds that it's hearing, and whatever its response is, that then triggers another sound from one of those categories. So there's a kind of feedback loop of engagement, excitement, and so on. And at the top right of the screen, you can see a Python app that takes the output of those performance metrics, and as you can probably just about make out there, sifts through these libraries, playing the relevant sounds from the various libraries. Okay, so that's basically the performance system. And what I want to do in this talk is to really talk about how I arrived at this, why I'm doing it, and what the potential I think for it is. And at the end, towards the end, I'll play you another piece, a more extended piece, to give you an idea of some of the capabilities of this this system. So I'll move on. If anybody has questions, I should just look in the chat as we go. Thanks, Pete, for putting the link to the video, but I will keep an eye on the chat in case anybody's got any immediate questions as we go. But hopefully this talk will answer any of the questions that you have immediately. So this project really fits into a much larger project that I'm involved in that's funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council. I say I'm involved in, I actually lead this project. This is called Aural Diversity. And the Python libraries were ones that we created, basically. So the Aural Diversity project is a way of understanding the diversity of hearing. Everybody hears differently. This is a very obvious thing to say, but everybody hears differently. Our ears are shaped differently. The outer flaps are differently shaped. The inner ear actually is slightly different to each person. So we already have that kind of built-in difference. And of course, our hearing changes throughout our life. You know, so as you get older, typically your hearing deteriorates. This is the condition known as presbycusis, or age-related hearing loss. And we may have temporary differences in hearing, such as wax in the ear that causes a blockage, or, you know, we all have that feeling we get sometimes of being tired, and then you yawn and your hearing changes. So we all hear differently. And then there are about 1/6 of the world's population who have a measurable hearing difference. That's to say, some kind of medically defined difference in hearing. And that's what this infographic represents. Now, I'm not going to go through all this in detail. I'm just trying to provide a context for you here. But just to describe broadly what you're looking at, along the bottom of the screen, in the blue area, you're seeing the normal hearing identified by the International Standards Organization as otologically normal persons in the age range from 18 years to 25 years inclusive. And this small sample is what we take for all our standards in acoustics as normal hearing. And of course, the 18 to 25-year-olds who are healthy and have perfectly balanced ears are a very small part of the population. So in actual fact, this is not really representative of the whole of human hearing. The rest of the infographic renders all of that other kinds of hearing. So I've called them hearing differences. And you can see that there are various types here. There are sensory neural differences, which is where you have some kind of inner ear or nerve problem. There are conductive differences, which is where you have blockages in the ear that stop you hearing properly. And then the area that's particularly interesting for this project is the auditory system. And this relates to neurological differences. So, for example, people might have some kind of auditory processing disorder where they hear sound normally, but their brain cannot process it properly. Or they might have something like hyperacusis, which is an increased sensitivity to sound. So this is not just about being deaf, or hearing loss. This is about different kinds of hearing. And the rest of the diagram, I won't go into detail on this, we don't have time, but universal variations affect everybody. So this is environmental, economic, cultural differences. And then, of course, technology, hearing aids people will be familiar with, cochlear implants, machine listening, acoustics engineering. So these are all ways of transforming the way we hear. If you have cochlear implants, you are actually hearing the world in a very different way to the way someone who doesn't have cochlear implants would hear. Now, the point of all of this is that this project really comes out of my own lived experience on two counts. The first is that I in 2009, got something called Meniere's disease, which is a balance disorder, first and foremost, but affects your hearing. And so I have severe hearing loss that's unbalanced. So this ear is much worse than that ear. I also have a lot of tinnitus, which affects the way I hear. And I also have a strange thing called diploacusis, which is where you hear two different pitches. So if you play a note on a piano, for example, I hear two different notes. So that difference in perception for me is very, very marked. And then the other thing is that I'm autistic. That this was diagnosed 5 years ago, but obviously I've been autistic all my life. Just wasn't diagnosed. And you'll see I've got a box there that says neurodivergence. And that affects the way I hear, has always affected the way I hear. So my hearing has always been different to other people's. This is all important in relation to the project, and I hope this will become clear in a minute. Okay, that's probably enough on hearing. So the project is created as part of a larger project called the Digital Score. And this is really about computing and computational technologies, and about the effect that they have on music, and particularly on music notation. The Digital Score project is led by Professor Craig Vear, who is based at Montfort University currently. And it's funded by the European Research Council. It's a 5-year project. And I've put on screen the objectives of this. And you'll see that the first one is to determine how new computational technologies can lead to the communication of innovative music ideas, new musical experiences, novel compositional approaches, etc. And I've highlighted there, and broader accessibility for musicians from traditional and non-traditional backgrounds. The second objective is to evolve a transdisciplinary theoretical framework that situates digital scores within the wider field of human-computer interaction, digital humanities, and music studies in order to understand the deep creative experiences of musicking, the act of music making, with digital scores built around artificial intelligence, machine learning, internet, networking, robotics, and virtual and augmented reality, gaming, and physical computing. And then the third is to discover how digital scores stimulate new relationships between musicians and how these profoundly influence the nature of the digital musician. And The Digital Musician is actually the title of a book that I wrote back in 2008, and it's in its third edition now. And Craig Vear was actually one of my students many moons ago, and has kind of run with those ideas as well. This idea that digital technology transforms the act of music making, transforms the way you think about music. So this is more than just, reproducing music in a digital form. It actually changes the way you conceptualize music. And that's really what this project is about, is how you can use technology to create these new ways of musical interaction, new environments, if you like. I tend to think of them as environments. So the digital score is not like a traditional music score. It's not a 5-line stave which tells you where to put your fingers or what notes to play when and all that sort of thing. I mean, it might contain that, but generally it goes quite a long way beyond that. And that's what this project did. And I was particularly interested in this idea that technology could make things more accessible for musicians. Autistic musicians and deaf musicians, let's get to the point here. Autistic musicians and deaf musicians generally find themselves in a difficult situation with regard to, shall we say, a professional life or some kind of active musical life. They're often excluded. I mean, the music industry, it has a high degree of hearing loss and hearing damage. But most musicians working professionally will never admit that they've got a hearing problem. This has been well researched. And that's because, to say that your ears don't work properly is pretty well an admission of professional inadequacy. Similarly, for autistic musicians, I think one of the biggest problems is that the music business relies on networking, the ability to interact socially, to form those kind of networks that carry us along. And of course, surprise, surprise, this is not the area that autistic people necessarily excel in. So very often you find autistic musicians working on the margins of the music business. So I was interested in this idea of the digital score in the context of autism and deafness or hearing difference, and how it could help to make this more accessible. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So we have some issues that really the project deals with. The first is this idea that you have a composer, a performer, and an audience. And I mean, this, of course, is the traditional way that music works. But the problem against that, the problem with that is that it tends to compartmentalize people into specific roles. And so this idea of musicking that Craig's talking about, of getting this cooperation between musicians, tends to be worked against in that kind of model, where someone's the author of the work, someone performs or interprets it, and then somebody else listens to it. So what you'll find in this project is a good deal of breaking down of that relationship. Then the second issue is the one I've just talked about, really, so I don't need to reiterate that at any length, that we hear differently, which means that your traditional ideas of musicianship have to be rethought. Traditionally, musicianship, you have to listen to what you're doing, listen to your instrument, and there's a good deal of resistance in the act of music making. You're often struggling to make the instrument do what you want, and so to win that struggle, as it were, you have to acquire good ears. And if you're deaf and hard of hearing, or autistic indeed, that it immediately presents an obstacle for that. And then the third problem is the one I've just mentioned, this issue of networking for autistic musicians. So the challenge for the project was, can a digital score provide a platform in which a quartet of deaf and autistic musicians could work creatively and challenge the traditional composer-performer model towards a way of working that is more inclusive? So I think to understand how we approach this, I need to introduce the various musicians. So there are 4 musicians involved in this project. So I've already described myself. Anya Ustaszewski, she's based in Brighton, and she's an autistic composer, and she works with a variety of sounds and instruments. And she's particularly interested in abstract narrative sound experiences. She loves metal sounds, Anya, and she works a lot with computers. She's processing and manipulating sounds all the time. Elisabeth Wiklander is a classical cellist with the London Philharmonic Orchestra, but she's also autistic and is a cultural ambassador of the National Autistic Society. And what we find with her is, she's obviously a very established musician. She's not on the margins at all. She's in the center of classical music, but at the same time, she has this kind of marginalized experience of being in that position, which she talks about, and she gives a lot of presentations about this. There's quite a few YouTube videos of her talking, if you want to follow that up. And then Simon Allen, who I think has worked on the margins a lot more. So he's a percussionist, a composer who gradually lost hearing through the 90s. And he tends to work with self-built instruments that he makes out of wonderful materials, old materials that he finds, and bric-a-brac and that sort of thing, but driven always by what he can hear and how he can hear it. So he's tending to be very experimental with materials. Okay, so that's the quartet. And we started the project in March this year, ran through to October, and we put it together over 6 sessions. Now, this is all working remotely, so we were online the whole time. And so the sessions were really a kind of coming together and critical discussion of the of progress and of the work, and how to create it. And we didn't even start actually with these with the EEG systems. We started very much with a much more open discussion and moved to the technology in the first session. I'd worked with brainwave readers before, and had always been interested in the possibility that they could be used in this kind of a way. But I hadn't really thought that through much, and it was I just mentioned it in passing to the rest of the group, and they got very excited and said that they would be interested in trying us out too. So what we had to do was to buy 4 of these emotive insights and send them to each of the musicians. The emotive insight is a kind of, I suppose you call it an entry-level brainwave reader. It's not a full the kind of thing you use in neurological research. But I wanted something that is easy or relatively easy to wear. A lot of autistic people have sensory issues, and you don't want to just inflict something on them that they wouldn't necessarily like. So this was something that was fairly easy to put on physically. And the device outputs several kinds of data, or handles several kinds of data. There's the raw EEG, that's to say the detection of electrical activity in different parts of the brain, detected through obviously through the skull. And then there's mental commands. So we actually spent quite a bit of time at the beginning trying to work with these, and kind of gave up actually. So what you can do with one of these, I don't know if people have tried these before, but what you can do with them is control objects on screen. So typically you can move a cube around, so you can move it up and down, you can move it forwards and backwards. And you do this by activating different parts of your brain. So for example, I'm going to look a bit silly here, but I started to think about swimming to get the push movement. And I found that it would actually help if I actually sat in front of the computer doing this. So I would sit there thinking about swimming and doing breaststroke. And that did make the cube move. Now, people who are really good at this can actually play games and do quite a lot of clever stuff on screen by training the device to respond to these thoughts. We, I think, found that quite difficult to do and became much more interested in the performance metrics that I've listed there. Which are really a kind of passive thing where it just registers what's happening in the brain. You don't have to do anything particularly to make those things happen. And I once again, this comes back to how this music works, because we're now talking about music that is made in a way that is unconscious or involuntary. You're not coming in trying to control the system or make it do what you want. The system itself is realizing what is happening to your brain in a way that probably you yourself do not understand or don't know. And that we found very interesting. The other kind of data, facial expressions, so it will monitor facial expressions. So if you blink or widen your eyes, it can pick that up and interpret that data, and also motion data. I've already done the swimming action, but there are quite a lot of physical actions you can perform that help with that. But we found that actually we didn't use any of those very much. It was mainly the performance metrics. And they responded to our responses to sound, but also our responses to other sensory stimuli. So for example, taste. So we tried experimenting with eating chili and eating honey. And these produced a response in the system, quite a strong response in the case of the chili, surprise, surprise. So taste, color as well, observing colors and shapes tended to produce responses. So you can see that we were kind of moving away from this idea of command and control that you would expect in music towards a system that, in a sense, dictates its own behavior. Okay, probably said enough about that. So someone asked about Python library. If you want to go there, it's available on GitHub. There's the address. This was, I can't take credit for this myself. It was created by Craig Vear, but Craig and I worked on it together, I suppose it's fair to say, and we beta tested it. And you can download it as an app. So what this is providing is a real-time control of libraries of self-created sounds and visual materials. So I've talked about there being a digital score, but there were some visual elements as well that we could use. So for example, when we involved Elisabeth playing her cello, the app would deliver visual imagery that she interprets with the cello. So the visuals side of it was part of it, but the primary focus was on sound. And then, as I've said, this enables the musicians to dictate the course of events independently of conscious decision making. And crucially, it allowed sharing between the musicians. So this is the process of creation. We had 4 remotely located musicians: Sweden, Sri Lanka, Brighton and Leicester. And we created, all of us created or recorded sounds that were meaningful to us. So the first part of the process was making these recordings, and each of us really took a different approach to that. And I'll talk more about those in a minute. And then you would wear the EEG headset and categorize the sounds based on the 6 performance metrics: engagement, excitement, focus, interest, relaxation, and stress. I should say, by the way, about these engagement, excitement, I did get interested in the extent to which these were really accurate descriptions of what the headset was measuring. I think they're fairly arbitrary. There is a difference between them, that is quite clear. But a word like stress, for example, implies something that I think is not reflected accurately by the headset. And initially, we did have a discussion about this, whether this was a problem or not. But we realized that it didn't actually matter terribly much what you call each of these performance metrics. What mattered is that there is a distinctive difference between them. And so those words shouldn't be taken too literally, I think, because things that I thought were relaxing me turned out to be stressing me, according to the headset. Well, I'm not entirely convinced by that. But, maybe that's my conscious mind making that kind of judgment. So that was step 1, essentially building a library of meaningful sounds that were tagged with these various attributes. And then step 2 was to start creating the syzygies. Now, this word syzygy, I like the word. It's what they call a univocalic word. That's to say, it's only got Y's in it. And you find the word cropping up in astronomy, in psychology, and in various other disciplines. In astronomy, it means like an eclipse. It's where you get things coming into alignment. So you get, 3 planetary bodies or 3 things in space just coming into alignment. And then psychology, interestingly, it's used to describe the communication between our conscious and unconscious minds. And I think this is what this project ended up being most about. And this is, from an AI perspective, I think this is quite interesting because AI deals so much with the conscious mind. And I think, to try and address the unconscious is something that is I think technically it's a big challenge, but I think as a sort of how shall I describe it, as a target, a destination for AI, it presents some unique features and it's quite interesting. So more generally then, a syzygy is just an alignment or a correspondence of different entities. And so here the entities are the musicians, the alignments are the worlds of the musicians. And each of the musicians created their own distinctive world. So what we did was to start with the categorized sounds of each individual, and we could make pieces that consisted entirely of just one individual's sounds. And then you try to combine the two, then three, and then all four participating musicians. So now we have a situation where one musician can be hearing the sounds of another, and the system that I've described interprets those sounds and reacts to them. And then you can extend that to three and to four. So you end up with a quartet, potentially. And the syzygies that emerge are those that are chosen by the brainwave reader, but also they're perceptual syzygies in the sense that one can start to observe relationships between the sounds and therefore between the musicians. And, you know, crucially for us, I think, it was the relationships between our brains, our unconscious minds, rather than anything we were, you know, trying to compose in an obvious way. You know, we weren't sitting down listening to each other's music and thinking, now, how can I make something that fits with that? This was much more about those kind of chance encounters generated by this unconscious process. So, so we found that the sounding results gradually revealed these connections and correspondences between us, but also differences between us, you know, and that became very clear as we were working on the project, was how the differences between us manifest themselves. And then finally, there was a third step, which related to Elisabeth Wiklander, who, as I've mentioned, is a world-class cellist. Now, since the other three of us are all composers, this started to look a bit more like a traditional music scenario, where we wanted to create notations for Elisabeth to interpret on the cello. So Simon Allen made some very beautiful coloured images with some graphical elements and suggestive instructions. And my notations were more conventional. Elisabeth normally plays dots, you know, as I say, she's an orchestral musician. She plays what's put in front of her. So she's not really an improviser. But we did get her to do some improvisation in this and some extended techniques. So these elements really were beyond the initial project and created an additional layer which gave a more musical and richer texture to the resulting pieces. And there are two pieces that feature the cello out of what we finalized. So how are we doing for time? Okay, so what I'd like to do is just play you a bit of the music, and then perhaps there may be questions, we can have a discussion. But I'll start just by describing, because we don't have time to play everything. There are 12 of these syzygies that are published at the site. I've given the address at the top. 12 of these syzygies, and we don't have time to play them all, so I can only give you a flavour of a couple of them, maybe. But I thought it would be useful just first of all to describe the worlds of the four musicians, and then to look at how these combine. So for myself, the sounds that I created tended to be combinations of digital and acoustic sounds, very carefully observed and processed in some way. So it was more like electroacoustic composition. And I had this image of a weather vane blowing in the wind, sort of evoking the arbitrariness of the performance metrics. I just liked the idea that my brain was operating independently of me. Why did I like that so much? Because two reasons. Firstly, because of my hearing difference. I can't listen to music for more than about 2 minutes at a time. It becomes physically painful for me to do it. And, you know, I'm a professor of music, and I've been a musician all my life. So that is really very, very hard to take. So I love the idea that there's a system here that can perform music where I don't actually have to listen to what the sounds that I'm making. So I can perform with this system with earplugs in, so I don't have the pain that I normally associate with listening to music now. But the other thing is that, you know, from an autistic perspective, I really like the idea that I've let go mentally of the compositional and performance process, that somehow this is working directly with my brain. My brain has its own way of doing things, as I know all too well. And despite every effort I may make or others may make to make me think and behave in a certain way, it will actually always do its own thing. And there's not much I can do about that. So I like the idea of a performance system that reflects that, if you like, willfulness of my own brain. Anya's world was rather different. She becomes fascinated by particular sounds. So, for example, the sound of Velcro tearing. So a lot of her recordings were of just Velcro ripping apart slowly or quickly. And also metallic sound. She's fascinated with metallic sounds. There's a lot of sort of spoons knocking on saucepans and so on. And these sounds really seem everyday sounds. They're sounds that we've all heard, right? And we wouldn't necessarily think of them as musical. But her way of recording these and her way of listening to these betray a kind of distinctive kind of listening. And you can hear that in her world. You can hear that sense of repetition and focus on these particular sounds. So she's hearing sounds that we would probably ignore, but hearing them as musical sounds. Elisabeth was rather different, and I've included a quote here to give you an idea. I'll read it out. As someone who grew up in the Swedish outback, the sounds of nature always make an impression on me, catching my attention and are connected with my deep sensory experiences and memory. It's a source which I tap into as a musician when performing and rely upon in my daily life for my overall well-being. My sounds are collected from the outside and inside of the Swedish log cabin where I reside, and are particularly tweaked towards life because during this project I became the mother of a baby boy. So we do have baby sounds, we have bird song, we have weather noises, and we have things like the sauna heating up, which makes a lovely sort of metallic, crackly, tapping sort of noise. And then Simon's world is an array of unusual instruments such as barrel piano, goldfish bowls, wine glasses, mouth bow, rickshaw horn, medicine rattles, and so on. And for him, and I said this at the beginning, because of his hearing loss, these sounds have a particular meaning. Each one has a very deep-rooted meaning for him. So he basically created a kind of library of these very specific and meaningful sounds. So I thought I'd play. Have we got time for? I think what I'll do is I'll just play I've got two examples here. I'll play a bit of each rather than trying to play the whole of either of them. And if you want to listen to the whole of them, you can go to the Digital Syzygies site. So this first one is just one of the syzygies. It's the combination of myself, Anya, and Simon. Sorry, I've got two playing at once here. Okay, this is Simon, Anya, and myself. Okay, I'll just stop that there. Now I'm going to just play part of the final syzygy. This includes Elisabeth Wiklander's cello, and you'll see that this is a much denser and more, I suppose, more obviously musical experience. Okay, sorry to stop so abruptly. There's no way to do an elegant fade out in PowerPoint, I think, which is what I would like to have done at that point. Obviously, that piece goes on for a while longer, but hopefully you got the idea there of the different voices, the different sounds that I've been talking about. So I just wanted to conclude by just looking at the impact of this and thinking about the future possibilities. So we did interviews afterwards, and these are some of the findings. For me, this was unlearning everything I'd previously learned about music making. So, you know, listening to your instrument precisely and accurately to what you're doing, being aware of others around you. It meant that I could listen without pain. And I had this self-actualizing brain, which I found very interesting. For Anya, she said it would allow her to see the possibilities of what will be possible for people who are not even neurodivergent, but come from different musical or not musical backgrounds. Opens the possibility of becoming a music creator with little prior musical training. How would people with other psychological disorders react to music through the brainwave reader? How would the reader track their experiences? For Elisabeth, it allowed her to see how other neurodivergent people like herself work in a music project focused on their similarities and differences that are harnessed in the strength-based approach. And she said, we have never been able to take that approach when working before, so we have an opportunity to learn how we work best while consciously exploring that part of ourselves in a context like this. And finally, for Simon, it helps in facilitating problems of communication in music making. It's an expansion of the techniques like indeterminacy. The composer and the performer are the same in this situation, so it's a leveling of the roles. This kind of technology can remove bars to participation, as one would not need to be trained in the Western classical tradition to make music. Potentially many more people could come to terms with understanding a musical score by interacting with the digital score interfaced by an EEG brainwave reader. And I think this is kind of the core of where we would want to go. So I know you're the British Computing Society, so you're interested in the computer science of this, and I'm talking all about the music and the art and the people, but the two are intimately connected. Without the technology, we wouldn't have been able to do this. It's just a completely different way of thinking about music making. So what are the next developments? First of all, we have to make a more sophisticated and robust system. I think we have to look at the brainwave reader that we're using and think about how that could be improved. I know there are other solutions that we could try for that. And then roll this out to a much wider community of users. And from a computing point of view, we need a fully developed AI that enables real-time collaboration between the musicians and that can be trained on a wider array of data sets. And this business, the correlation between EEG and reported emotions. So, you know, the way I felt about sounds and the way the EEG interpreted the sounds were two different things. So that I think is very fascinating and could illuminate the differences between autistic and neurotypical individuals, which takes us into this idea of flow states, which is something I haven't mentioned up till now, but music is often about entering a flow state where the music seems to exist independently of you. And musicians who are, expert and play well often talk about being in that kind of state where the music just flows, and you don't even have to think about it. Autistic individuals are often in that state anyway. It's a sort of normal condition. So we don't have much robust information about this, and maybe the EEG and the AI combined will be able to provide us with some more data about how those states can be accessed by autistic and non-autistic people. So we're planning an Arts Council application for a concert tour by the quartet, so we'll be doing this live, hopefully. And we've got a PhD studentship in process at the University of Leicester to develop the computational side of the project. Okay. Oh, final thought. Is there anything here I haven't already said? I don't think so. So I think I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for listening, everybody. And if you've got any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them. I'll stop sharing.
But while we wait for questions, I'd just like to say thank you very much, Andrew. It was very interesting, certainly an interesting set of instruments and some interesting results as well. And I did spot partway through Zoom captioning said, wow. So even Zoom liked it.
Yeah, the Zoom captions try to interpret every sound they hear, but they only interpret them as words, of course. So, you get wow was one, wasn't it? Which I think was responding to that kind of Jaws harp, that twangy sound. I think it heard that as wow, wow. I don't know, maybe I imagined that, but yeah. Kay and Mary, thank you very much. You're welcome. Nick, we have a lot in common. Maybe I could ask you to just elaborate a little bit. When you say you're a computational musicologist, are you meaning that you use computing to analyze music? Is that your approach? David, thanks very much. Do you think this could be used unethically by advertising agencies? So you mean, sorry, just go back to Nick for a minute before I come back to that question. Yes, using computing to explore theoretical conceptual models of music. Okay, right, great. Well, I'd love to find out more about that, Nick. If you want to send me some of your stuff, I'd be very interested. So unethically by advertising agencies. So can you just explain a bit more what you mean? I mean, I understand what the sentence means, but just what you had in mind there, Samuel, because you've obviously got something in mind about how this could be used. What were you thinking? Because I'm not sure. I think there are several possibilities. I mean, I think my simple answer is not really, but if you have some specific idea of how it could be used unethically, I'd be interested to know what that is. How groups can be targeted using certain audio. It's not a point of a new form of subliminal advertising. Yeah, well, I think they're already doing that quite a lot, actually. So I guess the question is, would this system provide some access to people's psychology that hadn't so far been discovered by the methods that they've used, given that there's an enormous amount of effort expended by advertising into understanding how people respond to sound and how people respond to music. Could this give you an additional aspect that would be unethical in some way? That's to say, presumably what you've got in mind there is that it's kind of penetrating to the unconscious mind, and that's a kind of invasion of people's private space. Maybe that I'm kind of reading a lot into what you've said, so if I've got it wrong, do correct me. But I think that will be quite difficult to do. I'm not sure it would be worth the effort on the part of advertisers to spend all that time and effort trying to kind of get in them that way. I think there are probably a lot more effective ways that you could oh, great! I am on track. Thanks. I think there are more effective ways that you can work this out more simply. I mean, you know, for example, I used to know a music psychologist who'd worked with advertising quite a lot, and they looked at the music that was played in supermarkets and then how that affected people's choices of what they were going to buy. You know, so you could have, you know, in supermarkets typically you have some kind of music track. These are not arbitrary; they're chosen quite carefully, and so you know there is a lot of theory around the idea that this affects people's behaviour. But I think it's quite a difficult thing with the brainwave reader idea to see how that could really penetrate. I suppose it's possible that the insights that I gain from the project, the extended project that I've described, could then you know, be taken as some kind of indication of unconscious desire or unconscious will. I suppose that's possible. But how you translate that then into something that worked for everybody, I'm not sure it would, you know. I think, you know, what I've described is very much about unique differences and coming together of people with very different minds. So, yeah, I think it would be hard to generalize out of that. So I'm thinking on my feet there, Samuel, but thanks for an interesting question. I'm not sure I've answered it fully, but it's very speculative. And I think my answer is not really. That's the short answer. Anybody else? Well, maybe I could just conclude by sort of going back to the beginning and just observing that what I've described is, Tim, did all the specific sounds get used in the piece where everyone was involved? No, they did not. So the libraries were quite extensive, and the brain chose what it wanted to choose. You know, out of a total of maybe 40 sounds, we heard, you know, a handful. So no, this was not by any means, you know, comprehensive. So, you know, you can see that actually it would have been possible to produce many, many more pieces. And in fact, we did. You know, we've kind of selected the good ones, as it were. But, you know, the thing has endless possibilities for creating new music. So this is something I think when we do the live version with the four of us physically in the space, all with the brainwave readers on at the same time, I think that will draw on that idea of, you know, multiple possibilities at any one moment. So the actual music you experience will be different every time. Louise, you're very welcome. So yes, I was just going to, oh, someone's arriving. So I was just going to say that, you know, I talked at the beginning about this idea of the digital musician, and, you know, you're a computing society, you're probably used to talks that are a good deal more about the technical aspects of computing. I hope this was interesting for you, because to me, this is about the computer, or the idea of the way of thinking that computers generate becoming part of the way that a musician might think. So this is work that is conceived digitally and would not exist without the technology. And the technology is fairly new as well. Brainwave readers, well, they've been around for a while, haven't they? But you know, they're still not very common in their usage. So, you know, we're experimenting with that technology too, and hopefully finding interesting ways of developing it and using it that perhaps other people have not done. Okay, I think probably, I sense we're coming to an end here, or I feel like I'm coming to an end.
Okay.
Pete, is that sufficient? Or
yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. So formally again, just want to say thank you for giving this presentation tonight. It will be published on YouTube in the near future. So what we'll probably do is email everyone that was on the attendee list to let them know that's being done. And I'm going to quickly hand over to Terry as well. So Terry, if you want to unmute.
That was very sneaky. Very, very sneaky indeed. I'm totally unprepared. Well, all I can say is, on behalf of the branch and the members, thank you, Andrew, for your presentation. I'll be honest to say, I'm not sure I followed all of it, but it seems to be a very interesting topic to get into, and I look forward to perhaps seeing more of it later on. Maybe you could think about putting an article together to go into IT Today, the BCS magazine, to see what interest there might be in the society as a whole. But normally we'd ask for a round of applause. I can give on behalf of everybody else.
I'm not a big fan of applause. I think the virtual applause is great. Yeah.
Right. How's that? A bit of that as well.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
Yeah, Terry, I just wonder, you said you're not sure you followed all of it. Is there anything I can help you with? Is there a bit that you would want me to explain a bit more, or shall we leave it there?
Just leave it where it is. I mean, I might want to go through the transcript and say, those are the bits I didn't understand.
Fine. And if anybody wants to follow up with me, please feel free to email. You can just Google me and you'll find me quickly enough. University of Leicester. Just feel free to email. I'd be happy to continue the discussion.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Andrew. And I'll now hand back to Pete to do the final rounding up.
Yes, okay. So again, obviously, thank you everyone that's attended.